Joining me now, MSNBC's Ed Schultz and Al Sharpton here in New York, along with Chris Matthews, who joins us again from Washington. Chris, I'm going to keep going back to the practicalities of how does this thing move, and how does it move given that it spreads over so many congressional committees. This is a very, very difficult challenge legislatively. And Boehner, we now know, Chuck just reported the Boehner reaction statement, very conciliatory, welcoming, in effect. Let's have the dialogue. Let's take a look at your plan, and please consider some of our proposals. Does that indicate that there's maybe a smoother path, at least at the beginning, in the House of Representatives for the president?
Yeah, it looks like a door has been opened by the Speaker for some bill to pass this session, rather this fall. In other words, it may be a mix and match kind of situation, but he clearly didn't say we're not going to do anything. And I think that means that there's two tests here. One is to get them to act on something, and that would include obviously these easier things the president threw out tonight, something in terms of payroll tax relief, which has got to be popular with business, especially on the employer side. It's got to be better, to be cheaper to hire people if you want to hire people anyway, if you want to hire people. And secondly, something on infrastructure that does benefit these members of Congress, including an incumbents protection fleet feature, which is every member of Congress who's in right now will get credit for every bit of the infrastructure that's built on their watch. So it's good for them all, potentially. So get something through. The second step is a real campaign to try to get the 218 in the House for something that really passes that's good enough for the Democrats and the country, and the 60 or something that avoids a filibuster in the Senate to actually get to meet your standard of actual effectiveness. But I think there's two standards. Will there be movement? Will there be action? Will there be a vote on something is the first standard, and I think he may be moving towards success in that regard. You don't get dead on arrival statements coming out from the Speaker tonight. You don't get that door is slammed kind of look at the thing. So maybe they're going to get some action. Then the question is, will they get the right kind? And I think it's two steps. It looks like they're moving already on the first.
Ed, how much action does the president have to get out of this to call it some form of success? I mean, does he have to get all the way through to legislative passage of at least 51% of what he's asking for? Or does he just have to just show the Congress has gone to work for him?
Well, I think going to work is a big thing, because that's something that they haven't done in the minds of the American people. There's such a stalemate going on in Congress right now. That would be a heavy lift and a good move. Speaker Boehner should like what he heard tonight, because President Obama said that it would be paid for. Paid for means more cuts are on the way. Spending cuts is what Boehner has been talking about for months on end. So they want to chip away at the big three. And the president tonight told his base, you got to give up a little bit on Medicare and Medicaid. You know, he says we're going to have to make these reforms. We're going to have to make some minor changes. Now we get into the devil in the detail. But we do know this: if it's $447 billion and it's going to be paid for, this super committee has already been told by the President of the United States, have at it, start cutting. I'm with you. I've told the country, I'm on record, that we're willing to make more cuts. And you pointed out earlier, not the specifics of exactly what kind of tax increases are going to come along. We do know that Boehner has never had any appetite whatsoever when it comes to shared sacrifice, asking the wealthiest Americans to do something about it. I thought the president tonight hit a home run in asking the country and asking the Congress, who are we? What do we stand for? And are we going to do anything for the American people in the next 14 months? Because there's a lot of people hurting. And that's a general message that will ring across the country in a very populist fashion.
Let's listen to what the president actually said about possible Medicare and Medicaid changes.
I realize there's some in my party who don't think we should make any changes at all to Medicare and Medicaid, and I understand their concerns. But here's the truth. Millions of Americans rely on Medicare in their retirement, and millions more will do so in the future. They pay for this benefit during their working years. They earn it. But with an aging population and rising health care costs, we are spending too fast to sustain the program. And if we don't gradually reform the system while protecting current beneficiaries, it won't be there when future retirees need it. We have to reform Medicare to strengthen it.
Al Sharpton? No applause on that one. Democrats sitting on their hands when he's talking about making adjustments to Medicare in order to pay for these jobs provisions.
Well, because everyone needs to know what that means. When you say gradually reform it, that you're not going to touch the people that are impacted now, but going down the road, what does that mean? How far down the road? What are we talking about? So I think that the devil is definitely in the details there. But again, as I said earlier, I think the tone was brilliant. I think that it would be very difficult for Boehner to look as a reasonable person to come out and say, with the president saying that he's going to look at some of the Medicare and other things that we all don't want to see touched, that he's going to deal with some gradual or minor changes. How could Boehner look like he is even a patriot to say, no, we're not going to talk about anything? Now, last night we're watching people talk about Ponzi schemes and everything else. Here you talk about the president saying to his base, we're going to have to make some adjustments. We've got to be big Americans. I think he checkmated Boehner, but that does not mean that Boehner and them won't double back and extract more than we are willing in terms of the president's base to give. So I think the work begins tonight. I think the president set a tone, but this is far from over.
Chris Matthews, when the president talked about having the rich pay more of their fair share, he actually talked, as he's done before, about Warren Buffett paying more in his higher income tax rate than Warren Buffett's secretary pays. And Republicans, you could hear it, Republicans in the House of Representatives laughed when they heard him making the Warren Buffett comparison. It doesn't sound like they are ready to get in there and start changing what Warren Buffett has to do in his tax return.
Yeah, I don't think they take that seriously, because they will come back. And let's look at the humor in this to some extent. People like Buffett have an awful lot of money they'll never even look at, let alone spend. They don't need it. So when they talk about giving back money to the government, at least rhetorically, it means nothing in practical sense. And by the way, they're not giving back the money. And I think a lot of these Republican people would say, wait a minute, if you want to make a contribution to the U.S. Treasury, go ahead, buddy. I'm making about $125 a year, and I do have a couple of kids still in school, so don't talk about me being rich. And I think they are very skeptical. I don't think that's smart rhetoric, using Warren Buffett. There's something phony about it. Something phony about Obama himself saying, I'm going to pay higher taxes. Everybody knows the President of the United States, this young Harvard lawyer, is going to leave the White House, however he leaves it, and make a ton of money if he wants to. The idea that he has to sacrifice because he pays a higher tax rate is ludicrous. I tell you, sometimes they hit these points, they strike me as so phony baloney that it'd be better to go back to values. I personally think they made a big mistake when they started playing around with the taxes and saying, oh, we're going to bring back the Bush tax or keep the Bush tax cuts for people under 250 and get rid of them for people over 250. We have a progressive tax system. Stop playing the game. It reminds me of Al Gore back in Florida saying, okay, we can recount 3 of the counties because that's where I'm going to do better. If you play the Mickey Mouse politics game, the other side's going to play it. That's what I think.
Ed Schultz, there are things in here that the Democrats have been standing in the way of. He talked about 3 trade agreements, Panama, Colombia, and South Korea. He wants to pass the trade agreement bills with them. He talked, it sounded, I think, probably to most listeners, kind of fanciful when he was talking about if we buy Kias here, the South Korean car, we should be selling Chryslers in South Korea. You know, I don't think there's Americans out there who think you're going to be selling Chryslers in South Korea if you just pass this trade bill with South Korea.
Well, you know, Lawrence, that's the dirty little secret in all of this. The people that we're doing trade deals with, they have a level of protectionism, and they protect their industries a heck of a lot more, and they dump all of their stuff on our markets. And I don't see anything in these trade agreements from what I've read, nor have I heard anything from labor that says that, you know what, this is really going to be great for us. Getting back to what Chris was talking about, one thing that I think the president's going to have a hard time selling to his base, and that is eliminating pages of loopholes and deductions, and we can lower one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. Wow. Yeah. Hold the phone on that one. Yeah. The base is going to go nuts on that. You've got corporate profits through the roof in this country. You got corporations that have got money off seas that are not repatriating that money. The president did not address that tonight. I think he's going to have a hard time with this caucus on that one.
Well, his retort to that is going to be, I can make corporations pay more taxes. If I kill the loopholes, I can still bring the rate down. They'll end up paying more. But you have to do both in order to do that. You must kill the loopholes first. And I don't see Republicans.
But I don't see how Republicans allow you to do that without a real fight. I think also in the trade agreements that you've got to remember that for a very interesting reason, I would say, I'm trying to be careful with language, Richard Trumka, the head of AFL-CIO, was the First Lady's guest tonight. So I think that part of trying to get labor not only on board, but having them energized, because they're the ones that can do the local work, was having the head of the AFL-CIO sitting there. So I think that part of the strategy is how this hits the ground. But a lot of how this hits the ground is where the devil in the details is going to, how it's going to be read by those that are going to have to live with this.
Al Sharpton, Ed Schultz, and Chris Matthews, thank you all very much for joining me tonight.